Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Khalid. I too have a prop. I'll just start by expressing my gratitude for the invitation to come this evening. Came a long way from Boston, and it's exciting for us to connect with the community here, particularly people who love design. So, guess what I'm going to talk about? I'll turn that on in a minute. So, what I'd like to do tonight is tell you a story. We have a great big idea. How do you get there with design? I think that this is a theme of this evening. So we're used to seeing finished products, holding them in our hands, using them in our lives. It was certainly for me, before I got into the field of design, a mystery of where does it come from? And what happened to all the bad ones? And then for all the time we've spent on design, why are there still uncomfortable chairs? I mean, that's an interesting question, right? Our bodies haven't changed in 10,000 years. What's going wrong with design that chairs aren't all comfortable? So let's talk about that. I'm going to start with an example, or maybe not. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of this device, this infant phototherapy device, and just sort of provide the background for it, tell you what the need is. I'll talk about the process that we went through to develop this product, and then finally, I'll talk about sort of where we're going next. So jaundice is a disease. I just want to make sure this isn't going to buzz and bother us. Jaundice is a disease that affects roughly 2/3 of newborns around the world, regardless of ethnicity. So many of the parents here, probably at least half, if not 2/3 of you, your children went through a period shortly after they were born where you had to either keep them at the hospital or bring them back to the hospital for what's called phototherapy. Now, jaundice is an issue. So jaundice is a consequence of a condition called hyperbilirubinemia. And we're going to have a competition after this presentation to say that really quickly. So hyperbilirubinemia is a condition where you have too much bilirubin in your blood. When a newborn's born, their body generates a large number of new red blood cells. As the old red blood cells break down, they generate this chemical called bilirubin. Too much bilirubin in the blood is toxic. So this is a challenge. It turns out that one of the leading causes of childhood deafness is this condition of hyperbilirubinemia, or kernicterus. It also can lead to long-term disability. So there's two ways to cure this. One is an exchange transfusion. So in an exchange transfusion, what you do is you remove all of the newborn's blood and replace it with donor blood. And as you can imagine, that's a difficult procedure to do, say, in the finest hospital in Abu Dhabi. If we think about doing it in Africa, Southeast Asia, Vietnam, in this example, that's actually very dangerous. So there is another way to treat newborn jaundice. It was actually discovered back in the 50s when nurses noticed that newborns close to the window never got jaundice. So it turns out that blue light penetrates the skin, it's absorbed by bilirubin, and it breaks it down. So on one hand, we can do this crazy thing where we take all of the blood out for a full exchange transfusion, or you shine a blue light on a naked baby. So when we got into this, the question for us was, well, how is this a design problem? Basically, what you want to do is get bright blue light on as much of the newborn skin as possible. This doesn't sound hard, but like many things that don't sound hard, really the challenge is all in implementation. So what does phototherapy look like? Well, this is a sort of top-of-the-line newborn phototherapy device. This is what you might find in say, the Children's Hospital in Abu Dhabi. This is called overhead phototherapy. This picture shows how it's intended to be used. We've got one newborn under the lights receiving phototherapy. And initially, when people were getting into this, thinking about, well, how might we adapt this device to a poor hospital that doesn't have the same amount of resources, the idea was, let's just make it less expensive. The problem is, this isn't a problem of cost. And many of the challenges in the developing worlds aren't challenges of affordability. Okay. My car is waiting. Given that it's not a question of affordability, what is it a challenge of? Well, it turns out that it's a challenge of implementation. So one of the things that we've observed with this overhead phototherapy device is that they'll put as many newborns under the light as will fit, which, if that was my baby, if this was my baby, I think I would maybe raise some issues with the hospital staff. So this is a challenge. It's not so much about shining light, but it's about how do we make it so that it's hard to use the right light incorrectly. And so this is basically with every medical device, every device that exists, there's something called like a spec sheet or a description of how it's intended to be used. So newborn phototherapy works great when it's one baby under relatively bright lights. When you put multiple babies under the same light and you don't have a light meter to measure, it turns out your eye is a terrible sensor for light intensity. So it looks like they're all receiving phototherapy, but as you can see from the light intensity map, it's actually only the baby in the middle that's receiving effective phototherapy. All the kids on the sides aren't receiving phototherapy at all. So the other big challenge is equipment itself. So every hospital I've ever been to in the developing world has a bunch of broken equipment out in the back. So it turns out that the statistic is that there's some shocking statistics. So first of all the donated equipment, there's about $1 billion in donated equipment every few years through the WHO, the various bilateral agencies. Only 20 or 30% of that equipment is ever even turned on. So if we think about donations, we want to affect newborn mortality. We donate a device to a poor hospital, and they never even turn it on. So 70 to 80% of equipment is never even turned on. And then if we think about the equipment that they're actually using, I was just in Haiti last week. They had the earthquake 4 years ago. Most of the medical equipment at the hospital that I was visiting that was donated after the earthquake is already broken. It's very difficult to keep equipment working in the context of unreliable electricity, a lot of dust, untrained users. So equipment is breaking or they aren't using it. This is a waste of about $250 million a year. We think that we can do something about this through design, addressing this design issue. So when we think about design, we used to think that design was about inspiration. Design is about aesthetics. I prefer to design for outcomes. When we design a product, we want to see a social outcome. More children surviving, more adults receiving education. So what does design for outcomes look like? Well, first step is how are people actually going to use this device? The second is that when we think about affordable medical equipment, we're working with a Vietnamese manufacturer of medical devices. This is 2 of their products, which are very, very effective. They're finding it very difficult to sell them outside of Vietnam. And one of the challenges is that even in the poorest hospital, everybody's seen sort of medical equipment on television. They know what a medical device is supposed to look like. So again, there are hospitals that wouldn't use equipment because it didn't meet the expectations for how it was supposed to look, even if it was, in fact, affordable, and even if it worked well. So again, thinking about design for outcomes, we actually have to pay attention to appearances, what people care about. Similarly, there's a phrase, human-centered design. Is anybody familiar with that as a phrase of art? There's a few people in the audience. Well, okay, who's our human? Which one of these people? So up in the top corner, we've got the doctor. And if any of you have been in a hospital, the doctor doesn't really use the equipment. They just come in and tell other people what to do with the equipment. So maybe it's the nurse who's using the equipment. Maybe it's the technician who's repairing the equipment. Maybe it's the director of the hospital. So who are we going to design for? In other words, who must we satisfy, and who can we afford to disappoint? Well, it turns out we can't disappoint any of them. We have to design for all of them. And that group, that's not everybody. It turns out that there's this whole constellation written in teeny tiny type so that you can't read it. But it turns out that from production to distribution to regulation, Michael Frias says who will choose, use, and pay the dues for this device. All of those people have to be part of the success of this product. So human-centered design makes it sound like there's one person that you need to pay attention to, it turns out there's a very large group of people that you have to listen to. So again, design for outcomes, we have to think about what is the context? Who are all these different people? And then finally, manufacturing. I think that one of the big challenges with design as an industry is it often happens last. So if you imagine the car company makes the engine, makes the wheels, then they bring in the designer to choose what color. I have an interesting career traveling internationally as a product designer. When I say I do design, and they're like, really? You know, look at what you're wearing. Or they ask about wallpaper, which I don't know anything about for the Q&A. I can't help you with wallpaper. Manufacturing, it turns out that design is limited by what you can actually make. So we have to pay attention to that issue as well. So just very quickly as the clicker will allow me, I'll just show you what the process looks like. And similar to the previous speaker, we start with doing direct research. So here's a district hospital. And as you can see, it has no equipment whatsoever. So newborns, jaundiced newborns who are brought there, are then referred as quickly as possible to the national hospital. And these are all pictures from Vietnam, Cambodia, Southeast Asia, but we've seen the same thing, Haiti, Africa, India. So the problem at the national hospital is that it's very, very crowded. You can see in the top corner, there was actually 250 beds in this hospital, almost 700 patients. So very crowded. The crowding is not desirable. One of the problems is what's called cross-infection. There's a newborn that has an infection, put him in bed with another child who doesn't have an infection, well, now they both have whatever the infection was. So when we looked into research, it's again, like, what are the practices? We were finding that in some hospitals, for example, they only have one nurse for the whole facility at night. They're having to make the decision, does the baby stay with the mother and breastfeed at night, or does the baby stay in the neonatal intensive care unit and get phototherapy overnight? They need both. How might we support both of those? Is it possible to bring phototherapy into the mother's room? And again, how do we get these kids away from each other? How do we make it hard to put more than one baby in the device? So our idea was to have a single bed. I'll show you here. Just very quickly. So this is the phototherapy device. You can see that we've got lights coming from above and from below. One of the fun things that we've seen is that people would say, oh, well, that naked baby looks cold while it's receiving phototherapy from above. So what I do is I come and put a blanket on them while they're getting phototherapy, and then they're not cold. Well, then they're not getting phototherapy either. So somebody asked me once, what's the biggest difference between design and engineering? And I've realized that the biggest difference for me is that for a designer, there's no such thing as a dumb user. So how many of you know how to use, how many of you have cell phones? Everybody has a cell phone. How many of you would say confidently that you know how to use every single feature of your phone? Okay, so we've got some super users here. The engineer would tell you that if you don't know how to use a feature, well, then just read the manual. Do any of you have your cell phone manual still? Well, we've got an archivist here who's kept his. So I think that one of the challenges is, even if we included a manual with this device, how likely is it that somebody would ever read it? How much would it help them? We have to make the right way to use this, the obvious way to use this. Or the way we like to say is, make it hard to use incorrectly, hard to use wrong. So that's what it looks like. And the process of development, again, research, we look in the United States, where money is no object. What does the context of care look like? Doing the same research overseas. Now we're asking people, well, you don't have any resources. How do you prefer to do phototherapy? And really, you have to get out there and ask lots and lots of questions. We talk to mothers, nurses, doctors. One of the challenges that we have is I don't speak Arabic. It's probably obvious by now. Nor do I speak Vietnamese, nor do I speak Indian. Many of the Indian Hindi, I don't speak Malayalam. So for us, part of the question is, how do I get feedback when I don't speak the language? And so here I'm using a card that's translated in Vietnamese and in English, and I'm asking them, better or worse? We do these sorts, where they will sort ratings of different qualities of the device. Similarly, what I want to ask them, with the alpha prototype, we brought it to Vietnam and we said, well, we'd like to put a baby in it. We've designed it to be kind of cozy. And they're like, oh, we have a baby we can bring out to test. And they brought out a 2-meter tall woman, which in Vietnam is maybe the tallest Vietnamese woman who's ever lived. And her baby was enormous. So she had this gigantic baby, and they kind of wedged it into the bed. And we said, I think we're going to make the bed bigger. Where did you find this kid? So for us, it was a good question. How big should it be? Just show me. Show me with a ruler. Similarly, how would you use this device? This nurse is telling us that I don't like looking at this blue light, so what I do is I put a cover over it. This is actually what's called a heat sink. The lights generate a lot of heat. This metal piece is designed to radiate the heat, and now we're going to put a flammable blanket on top. Again, no dumb users. If this catches on fire and kills a child, the fact that we said, oh no, it's in the manual, don't do this. We have to solve for that. We want to put it in the bed with the mother. So again, lots and lots of testing. We wanted this device to be portable, and to me, it was portable. Then we gave it to a sort of 1.20 meter nurse who would fit in my pocket, and it doesn't look so portable anymore. So a lot of these questions. So where are we now? Firefly's in production in Vietnam. It's in 9 countries around the world, 5 in Southeast Asia. Let's see, 2 in Africa. It's in Burundi and Ghana. We just brought it to Haiti last week. We've treated thousands of children. Next year, when we hit our production target, we're going to scale to 500,000 kids treated. And of those, about 10% would have died or had permanent disability. So it's a great result. Where are we going to go from there? So it turns out that there are many, many issues that are design problems, not technology problems. 2 of them. So pneumonia kills more children under 5 than AIDS, TB, and malaria combined. Pneumonia is a problem of diagnosis. Antibiotics exist, and they're effective. It's difficult to diagnose children who have it. There's a device called a pulse oximeter, which measures blood oxygen saturation. Actually, I'd like to thank the foundation for their help in our work developing an affordable pulse oximeter for these same countries, following all the same principles that we used here. The other thing is warming. There's about 1 million newborns a year that die in their first week because they got too cold. Too cold. I went to MIT. I'm a smart guy. Warming does not sound like it should be very hard. We got to keep a kid warm for a week. I think we can do this. So I think that these are sort of the basic challenges, and then it's as you get into the details that you really find out what makes this difficult. So with pulse oximetry, one of the challenges is that the sensor that's used, that's applied to the newborn skin, is disposable. So the idea is to stop infections. We're going to apply this to the baby's skin and then throw it away. Well, they're $35 a piece. So that adds up to $35,000 a year. And so the giveaway, it's like a free Ferrari. So I'm going to give you a free Ferrari. Fantastic. You drive around. Oh, and then you need to get new tires. And they cost $1,000 a piece. So the free Ferrari doesn't really help. So this is our newborn pulse oximeter. We're calling it Pelican. And this is an early stage of our newborn warmer, which we're calling Otter. And our hope is that lots and lots of newborns who are dying now don't need to. And I think that design is the answer. So thank you very much.